Roger Phillips.
BBC Radio Merseyside.
Hello and welcome to the Phillips Hour with me, Roger Phillips. I'm delighted to be back. It's been a privilege all this week with a series of one-hour programmes looking back over the last 9 months of the corona pandemic. Now, then, all the way through the corona pandemic, we've heard from scientists and experts in infectious diseases. Members of SAGE, the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, have spoken at the frequent Downing Street press conferences and constantly provide advice to the government about COVID-19. And we have many scientific and medical experts here on Merseyside who are making important contributions to help to deal with the coronavirus. Professor Tom Songland is Director of the Institute of Infection and Global Health at the University of Liverpool. He also has his own Scouse Science podcast. Tom, thanks a lot for joining us on this. Good to have you on. When the first lockdown came in March, what were your immediate thoughts?
Well, we saw the lockdowns in China, of course. And to be honest, I think like a lot of people, I thought, well, that's how they do things over there, but that's not really going to happen here. But it very quickly escalated. And I think when the lockdowns happened, we absolutely needed them. In a way, the government was slightly behind the people. People were voting with their feet, you know. Already, if you remember, the football matches stopped and many activities stopped. And so we clearly needed a lockdown. And I think I thought, oh, we'll probably have this for 2 or 3 months and then it'll all be over. And I feel now a bit like people did before the wars. You know, people said, oh, it'll all be over by Christmas. So it has taken longer, but I do think it will be over soon.
You have been at the forefront of this fight to fight the virus, Tom. I mean, the problem is we didn't know much about it early on. I mean, I know you know all about infectious diseases, but we didn't know about this particular one, did we? We had to find out.
Yeah, it was a completely new virus, but it was clear that it was closely related to SARS virus, which caused this smaller epidemic some years ago. So we had to get a lot of information very quickly. But we have learned from the SARS virus from years ago and from Ebola and other recent epidemics, the scientific community has learned how to work together quickly across international boundaries to tackle some of these challenges.
Where do you start with this unknown virus? I know you say it's like SARS-2, but how do you start to understand it? Is it the genetic makeup that's important?
Yeah, there's several ways of looking at viruses and thinking about them. So the genetic information is really important, and that was released very early by the Chinese, and that then allowed everyone around the world to start developing diagnostic tests because those are based on the genetics. But also we look at the patterns of transmission. You'll remember initially we thought that the most important spread was from people touching things that had been contaminated. We didn't think respiratory spread was so important, but then as the evidence came out, that became more important. Hence, we now all wear the face masks. So there's lots of ways of looking at viruses and understanding them. And also, critically, this is a virus that lived in animals initially and then did this jump from animals to humans. And we call those zoonotic viruses. And that's a particular group of viruses that we have to keep an eye on.
One of the good things, ironically, about this horrible virus is that people have become aware of how important science is in dealing with it. I think science has become the forefront.
I think you're right. Yeah, people are very aware of how important science is. And that's wet science, kind of laboratory science, but also behavioural science. There are lots of different elements to science. And they've really combined to help us deal with this pandemic. But there's been a lot more interest in science. And of course, among politicians and policymakers, and we've had a lot of engagement with those people.
Yeah, but it's interesting to me that it seems to me that people pay much, much more attention to people like Chris Whitty, the scientists, if you like, than they do to the politicians, such as, you know, Matt Hancock or whoever. People really want to listen to the scientists. They believe them.
Yeah, I think that's true. And of course, I think it was Michael Gove who said just a few years ago that people are sick of experts. And he couldn't have been more wrong. I don't think he was right at the time then. No. But people do want to listen to scientists and understand science. I mean, who'd have thought, you know, I've chatted to you a lot on Radio Merseyside, who'd have thought a year ago that we would have spent time discussing things like the R number, the reproduction number, and what that means. You know, that's a kind of scientist's dream to think, oh, people are going to be interested in that. But clearly everybody needed to be.
Well, it's interesting because I talked earlier about how we looked at culture yesterday and we looked at science, looking at science today in this programme. But you combined the two with your Scouse Science podcast. It's an interesting combination.
Well, that's right. I mean, I've done a lot of interviews with BBC television and radio, and it seemed that there's an insatiable appetite at the moment, and people, I think, want more than just the quick interview. And so in the podcasts, we have a scientist on, and then we also have a famous face, and you've been kind enough to grace us as one of our famous faces. And we have a chat, as you know, and it's a great chat. It can go in any direction, but it's based around the science and what's been happening in the city and also across the country. And it's crazy. We've had like 50,000 hits on the podcast. So, we hope it will continue growing, and people can search for it wherever they look for their normal podcasts, or you can track it on Facebook.
But it's interesting to me that you don't just have a scientist. It is not just dry science. You're sort of combining it with life outside science as well.
Well, yeah, that was my idea, because I think there are dry science radio programs, and there's lots of those, and there's always been lots of those. But the challenge with those is that they tend to attract people who are interested in science and want to listen to science. Whereas what we've done in ours, by just having a chat with people like yourself, or we had Andy Burnham, the Greater Manchester Mayor, on one programme. We had Frank Cottrell Boyce. We had Jane Garvey from BBC Woman's Hour, and by including someone who's not a scientist, it makes sure that we talk in a way that everybody can understand, but it also makes sure we address the kind of things that are on everybody's minds, and also we have a lot of fun and talk about anything that crops up.
Yeah, no, it's a good laugh. And one of the most important things that has now cropped up, we've got this vaccine, and we've also got the Oxford vaccine, which, if it comes off, well, more and more people will be vaccinated. Just explain, they're all different, are they? How these vaccines work against COVID-19?
Yeah, they are different. The basic way a vaccine works is it mimics what happens in an infection. So when any of us get an infection, our body fights the infection off with things like antibodies, which are like the foot soldiers, and then T cells, which are like the heavy artillery. So we fight the infection off, and that means if we meet that infection again, we're ready to deal with it. And what a vaccine does is it shows you a tiny bit of the infection so that your body gets ready. And so your body's ready in advance, and then when it meets the real infection, it can deal with it before the infection even gets a hold. And there are different ways of different vaccines showing a tiny bit of the infection, but the essence is the same. The basic approach is the same. But the Pfizer vaccine, which is the one which is currently being used, shows the body a little bit of the virus's genetic material. The Oxford vaccine shows the body a bit of the virus's protein on the surface, but the basic principle is the same.
Yeah, Liverpool was quite involved, was it not, in the testing for the Oxford vaccine?
Yeah, we've been involved in that, trials of that. But also there's been a lot of research on COVID that's been led from Liverpool. And this includes the big national study, which has studied all patients in hospital, 80,000 patients in hospital. And that's been able to tell us things like who gets sick and why they get sick and how we can stop that happening. We've also led the work on the brain side of COVID-19, because the virus doesn't just affect the lungs, but it also infects the brain. And that's work we've been leading out of Liverpool, and then drug trials as well. So I think that people in the city can be very proud of our scientific and research response to the pandemic.
Someone's emailed Tony from West Derby saying, if someone unknowingly goes for a COVID-19 vaccination and are carrying the virus, would they be okay afterwards if they've been given the vaccine?
It's a good question, and the short answer is yes. The studies of tens of thousands of people who have been vaccinated in the studies, some of them have actually looked and said, look, actually, some of these people were infected with virus at the time when they got the vaccine. And if you like, that the two, as far as we know, the two will work together to protect you from future infections.
But we really, even if we'd had the vaccine, we should all be taking real care of ourselves, should we not? Or real care of other people, in a sense.
Yeah, because so over the months ahead, more and more people will get the vaccine. But we have to continue to do the basic measures of face, hands and space, as they say, because not everybody will be vaccinated at the same time. And also, we know the vaccine is effective for several months. It may be effective for several years. We just don't yet have that history because the vaccines haven't been around that long. So I think even, as the vaccine's used, we will be able to ease up on things like the lockdowns. But I think for a good time to come, people will be more cautious about coughs and colds, etc.
One of the things that may worry people, I don't know, is that we now hear this, well, according to Matt Hancock, there's been a mutation. Now, is that really worrying or not?
No, viruses mutate all the time. That's part of their nature, and all that means is their genetic material changes in tiny ways. And so that's been observed for this virus, like for other viruses. The critical question is, has a change in the virus's genetic makeup made it more severe, more nasty? And there's no evidence to suggest that at the moment. So I think this is about the third or fourth story about the virus mutating. They mutate all the time. It just happens that mutations happened, which has allowed this particular viral strain with this particular mutation to take up a greater proportion of the space of all the viruses, if you like. But I wouldn't get worried about that at the moment.
Is it somewhat, I mean, the flu virus, I get the flu jab every year. It's a different virus or a different vaccine, I think, every year. That's because of a mutation, is it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there's different types of mutation. And we talk about shift and drift. And if you like, what flu does is every year, every couple of years, it has a major change in its genetic makeup. It's a complete shift. And that's why it needs a different vaccine. Right. This virus, the COVID virus, is just gently drifting along. And so far, all the evidence suggests that the vaccine we have, the one that we've approved, is effective for all the virus that's circulating. But it might be over time that we do have to modify the vaccine in the future if the virus drifts into being something that is different to what we currently have. But the little tiny changes that are happening at the moment are not making any significant impact.
Just finally, Tom, you spent 10 minutes or so talking to us, and something to scientists a lot, but getting into the media spotlight over the last 9 months. Now, is this a good thing, or really, would you be rather left to get on with the work that you're principally there to do?
Well, there are times when my friends at Merseyside and others call me and I say, sorry, I'm busy. But no, I think it's really important for scientists to explain what we're doing. The public are interested in what we're doing. The public pay for a lot of what we're doing. And if we want people to behave in sensible ways, and indeed if we want politicians to make sensible decisions, they have to understand the science. And they're only going to understand it if people like me talk about it and people like you give me the opportunity to talk about it.
Well, it's been great talking to you all this year, and doubtless we'll talk next year as well, Tom. Thank you very much indeed. Have a great Christmas, and let's hope for a very happy vaccine-full New Year. Thank you.
Thanks, Roger. Same to you. Thanks.
Cheers. That's Professor Tom Solomon, Director of the Institute of Infection and Global Health at the University of Liverpool. Brings the time to 18 minutes past 1.